Good evening and welcome to The Strand. I'm Christina Foxley, the Director of Events, and I'm so excited to welcome Mike Farrell and Laura Flanders here tonight to discuss Mike's new book of Mule and Man. Mike Farrell is best known for his role on MASH as Captain BJ Hunnicutt. Aside from his work in Hollywood, Mike Farrell is an award-winning activist, humanitarian, and writer. In 2007, the Los Angeles Times named him Person of the Year. Of Mule and Man chronicles Mike Farrell's road trip in his Prius named Mule to promote his LA Times best-selling memoir, Just Call Me Mike, A Journey to Actor and Activist. In his latest book, we learn about his impressions of the issues facing each community he visits, his witty exchanges at author events, even one at the Strand with Walter Mosley, and his encounters with other leading activists. Laura Flanders is the host of GRITtv, the new daily news discussion program on Free Speech TV, which you can find at 8 p.m. every night on Channel 67 in Manhattan and anytime at grittv.org, and also serves as host of Radio Nation, the nationally syndicated weekly radio program of The Nation magazine. Her writing has appeared in The Nation, Ms. Magazine, and the San Francisco Chronicle, among many others, and she has been featured on various television programs including Larry King Live, The O'Reilly Factor, Washington Journal, and Good Morning America, among many others as well. She's also the author of a number of books, including her most recent, Blue Grit. Following our discussion, Laura and Mike would be happy to take your questions. I'll be walking around with this wireless microphone, so please wait for that before you speak. And then they'll sign copies of their books for you, which you can purchase downstairs on your way out of the store. Please join me in welcoming the prolific Mike Farrell and Laura Flanders to The Strand.
Yay, The Strand, independent-owned bookstore for, what is it, well over 100 years? 80, well, very close to 100 years. I want to welcome Mike and also Shelley Fabaras, who's in the back with the best hair in the city. Thank you so much for coming, and thank everybody for coming to the Strand. This is always a wonderful harbor from the storm, and when the storm is really raging out there, you feel particularly cozy to gather with your colleagues here at the Strand Books store here in Manhattan. Mike and I sort of traveled interestingly similar paths with our books. I discovered on reading Mule and Man. In 2006, I headed out to try to prove to my Air America radio audience that all was not lost. Or really, it was 2005 I headed out, and 2006, to prove to them that after the 2004 election, all was not lost.
Good for you.
I'd spent the night on the radio that night trying to cheer people up. 2004 election was not an up moment for Air America radio listeners. In fact, so many people said they were going to move to Canada that somebody from Vancouver called in and said, you do know you need a visa to come here. I tried to give, up stories, yes, but Nevada voted to raise the minimum wage, and Montana elected a Democratic governor for the first time in 16 years, and... well, I ran a little short of ideas. But afterwards I thought, am I just dreaming, my optoholism taking over here? Maybe I should go and see if any of this hope that I nonetheless felt, even on the day after Election Day 2004, was based in reality. And I traveled around the country, and 2 years later, Mike set out on a similar kind of a journey. And his book of Mule and Man is a charming a love story. You find out how Mike fell in love with his Prius. There are a few rocky moments.
There were indeed.
We never really get to hear how Mule feels about you.
Mule is a rather reticent creature.
But Mike brings you sort of missives from coast to coast, more than 8,000 miles, the stories of people trying to make change where they live, people who embraced him on his book tour and from whom he learned and learns in an ongoing way. So I hope that in this conversation we can hear a little bit about what you found around the country. I'm sure people will have questions about your memoir, Just Call Me Mike. But I'm going to take a point of privilege, I guess, and ask you to start it today and tell the people here what you were doing today, because I think it's exciting and important, and it's why we love Mike Farrell.
Well, thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am. Laura I was supposed to be on Laura's show today, and she very graciously allowed me to stand her up. I've been involved in a case in Virginia, an innocent man in prison, originally on death row, subsequently in prison for the last 30 years. And while Shelley and I on this tour, and prior to this tour, I've been trying to get a meeting with Senator Jim Webb of Virginia to explain to him about this case and why we need Governor Kane to act, because this is Joe's last chance. It's a long story. I can give it to you if you'd like, but long story short, this is a man who was the protocol for people on death row fits him perfectly. He was sexually abused as a child. He was abused physically and every other way. He left home when he was 11 years old. By that time he was already an alcoholic and a drug addict. He left home because of the abuse. He traveled to he was in Florida, traveled to Southern Virginia, was working as a waterman, was subject to the depredations of his addictions, and had blackouts. He was living with two women, a woman and her daughter in Virginia, in an apartment. He had a blackout. He came up from the blackout and found them both dead. Both of them being murdered, the daughter having been raped. Being a self-hating addict, he assumed that he must have done it. Ran from the house, got on a bus to go home, of all places, and didn't even get there. Went to the first policeman he saw and said, "I think I've just killed two people," and turned himself in. They called the Virginia police, who came and got him. He confessed to the crime 5 times because the confessions didn't make sense. They didn't add up. They didn't meet the truth about the situation in the crime scene. But he was convinced he was evil and must have done it. So the Virginia quickly had their crime solved, and they convicted him and sentenced him to death. I got involved in the case in the 80s. This was 1979 when he was convicted. I got involved in the case in the 80s. We found that there was evidence, a lot of evidence, that pointed somewhere else. Joe never remembered having committed the crime, but always thought that he was the murderer. We finally found enough evidence to point to his innocence, but Virginia has a rule, or had a rule, that said, they called it the 21-day rule. 21 days after you're convicted, no new evidence can be brought into your case. So Joe was without hope, and we appealed to Governor Wilder at the time and finally got him to pay attention to the case, and he commuted his sentence from death to life in prison on the basis of possible innocence. Now, possible innocence was the term that the governor used. I thought life in prison for possible innocence is a little hard to swallow. But the trick was that we had asked the governor to do something that was going to require a new trial, which we believed would have cleared Joe and set him free. The governor, instead of doing that, turned it over to the Attorney General, Mary Sue Terry, who had dreams of becoming the governor and was not willing to offer a new trial for fear that he would in fact be set free and her prosecutorial office would look bad. So she refused the new trial, and Joe has rotted in prison ever since. We've been trying to get him out, and Governor Kane's presence in Virginia, his relative sensitivity on these issues, made us believe that it was possible. I've been contacting Senator Webb for a long time, or trying to contact Senator Webb for a long time, and was in D.C. 3 days ago and was unable to get to see him or Bobby Scott, the member of Congress from that area, and left. We were in Baltimore, Maryland last night, and I got a call saying that Senator Webb would see us today if we could get there. Laura was kind enough to let me out of the commitment to be here, and I got on a train from Baltimore, went down there, had a meeting with Senator Webb, had a meeting with Congressman Scott, had a meeting with Senator Leahy, who just happened to be in his office and was willing to meet me, and have generated some interest. I can't say commitment, but they've generated some interest. What we asked them to do was to tell Governor Kane that this is a case that deserves his attention. He, as you probably know, got into a lot of trouble for pardoning the Norfolk 4 sailors, 3 sailors that were left of the Norfolk 4 who were convicted of a rape and murder they did